The reason why most new investors end up losing money and usually end up quitting after the first deal is because they buy the wrong deal. You see, most people think that this business is super easy. You buy an old, ugly, abandoned house, you slap lipstick on a pig, and then you sell it for a $100,000 profit. I wish it was that easy. I have learned both the hard way and the easy way of this business. So in this video, I want to provide you with that information so that you have a clear understanding of what to buy and definitely what to avoid. So first, I'll break down 10 types of properties that I never buy. And then at the end, I'll give you my exact criteria that I personally use to buy the right deals to maximize my profit potential. Starting off with the first one, buying cheap properties in cheap areas. This is the first thought that most new investors have, myself included, when we're just starting off, because we think cheap areas, we probably go to the middle of the country where you can get a property for $5,000, $50,000, $100,000, and it's super cheap. It's very accessible for most people. And that's why we feel inclined to go to those markets. Now, I'm gonna offer you a different perspective, actually two different perspectives to look at this, so that way you make the right decision when buying these out-of-state properties. The first one is buying cheap properties doesn't always equate to making a lot of money. The truth is that flipping in these cheap end markets usually means smaller margin deals, meaning that you're probably making anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 profit per deal. Now, if you compare that to the higher end markets like California, New York, those kind of markets, more expensive markets, the average kind of profit size per deal is going to be anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 plus, which then also equates to the amount of volume that most of these investors do in their respective markets. For example, someone flipping in a higher end market, for example, like California, doing 3, 4, 5 deals in a year will probably make the same, if not more, than someone who's flipping in a very cheap end market. They have to do 50, 100 deals, which is why most people, they kind of make that flashy on YouTube and on the internet, saying that they flip 100, 500 deals in any given year, which is crazy for that kind of volume, and they probably can do that. The thing is, because they have that kind of volume in order to make the same amount as someone who's flipping in the higher end market. And the second perspective and kind of point that I want to make with buying in a cheap end market is that cheap also means a lot more risk when it comes to actually selling these properties. Yes, you might be able to buy them for cheap and quickly. The thing is, to be able to sell them to the right buyer also becomes risky, in the sense that they become harder to sell because they're cheaper, and there may not be a bigger buyer pool for that specific property that you're trying to sell in a cheap, low-end market. The point that I really want to drive home here is that you don't have to go to the highest end market like California to flip a house. You also don't have to go to the middle of nowhere to flip a cheap property. My biggest and best recommendation for you, anybody that's starting off or buying their next deal, is start locally. Why? Because you actually know the local market. If you've been living there for many years, it's like you know the corner of every single block and the corner of every single neighborhood, which makes it a lot easier to know your end buyer, your end consumer for the property that you're actually buying. When you know your local market, it makes it extremely easy to invest in real estate. Compared to all the guru investors that say, oh, go invest in out of state, it's way easier and you can do it remotely from the comfort of your home. The thing is about real estate, I've learned this kind of both the hard way and the easy way as well. Real estate is something tangible, it's physical, you can see it, you can smell it, you can touch it, you can control it, right? It's an asset. And when you have it out of state, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go out of state, but when it comes to fixing and flipping, it's a very hands-on intensive thing. And being able to have that close proximity to that property, especially doing your first deal, you want to have that proximity to make sure things are flowing and going the right way. That is why I always recommend when you're just starting off and buying that first or next deal, make sure to do it locally because you can have that control over that property. The second type of property that I would never buy is houses, properties on busy streets, next to commercial buildings, next to train tracks. The truth is, and you and I both know this, people value privacy. And when you have a property that's located on a main boulevard or avenue or just busy street in general, a lot of noise, a lot of action going on, it becomes a lot harder to sell for the right buyer. And yes, you might say if you're going to flip in a big city, then you might be surrounded by those kind of things, of course, but for the majority of people that are looking for their first or next home, people tend to value a lot more the privacy aspect. And so when you have a house, a property on a main road or next to big commercial buildings, it becomes a lot harder to sell. And that's why most investors, when they get these kinds of properties, they're asking themselves, why can't I sell this property? Well, they may just ask themselves, is this property on a busy street next to a highway? Those kind of things can make or break a deal for you. Property type number 3, properties that have foundational or structural issues. Now, this is a big one. I know that most people might say, if you're an investor, then you can take on any kind of project. When you have the right team, the right crews, the right contractor, you can make it happen. And that may be true for a lot of investors that might be, in the game for a long time. But if you're just starting off, you want to be able to get your hands on a property that you can get in and out as quickly as possible. Why? Because the longer you take, the longer your timeline, the riskier it can become. The market changes. If the project timeline is taking more than 5 months, you have to also take into account that your holding costs for the amount of time that you're spending on the project will also add up in costs, thus also slimming down your profit margin. And so for me, that's kind of my general rule of thumb, right? If the project itself, right, the renovation is going to take longer than 5 months, when I'm running my numbers, it's a deal that I most likely will not take. And the reason why is because I kind of compare it, right? If I come across a deal that's going to take me 2-3 months, I might make slightly less in profit compared to another deal that I might make slightly more, but it's going to take me twice as long just to get the same project done. I'd rather go for the easy, quick, and in and out deal. That way I can get out my money faster to be able to go on to the next deal. Because once you sell it, now you're off the hook. Now you've gotten your money back. Versus if you're still working on the project, you still have your money tied to that project, whether it's your own money or an investor's money. So you start noticing a trend here. It becomes a lot more risky when you go with that route, the longer timeline. Now, are there times when I might take a property that has a slight bit of a foundation issue? Yes. But if I only know that I've walked it through with a contractor and they've kind of given me an estimate and a timeline that it won't take longer than a certain amount of time, obviously not more than 6 months, of course, but to fix that specific problem, if the general house is a cosmetic fixer-upper, but it has a slight bit of foundation issue and it's not gonna completely tear down my deal, then I'm okay with that, right? As long as it doesn't exceed, $50,000 to renovate or to redo the entire foundation. That's when it becomes extremely, extremely risky. Once again, that's just my strategy. I wanna get in and out of a deal as quickly as possible to turn around my money into the next deal. Property type number 4 that I would avoid is buying smaller homes in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, which means a 1-bedroom, 1-bath house, or a bedroom house with no bathrooms. I mean, at that point, it's not even a house. The reason why I don't buy anything smaller than a 2-bedroom house is because a 1-bedroom house is very hard to sell. There's not many buyers, or the buyer pool is not very large for that kind of property. And my general rule of thumb is when I go into a market that I want to fix and flip in, you have to look at the demographic of the type of buyer, consumer, the end buyer that's going to buy this property, right, in that specific location. If the general demographic and population tends to be families, right, that move into a small 2-3 bedroom home, then that's going to be the ideal property that I want to buy. It would not make any sense for me to go buy a 1-bedroom house because I'm going to have a very hard time to sell it since there's not many buyers for it. And in general, people tend to value a lot more square footage in a home, whether it's more bedrooms, whether it's a second bathroom, that adds a lot of value. I mean, you go to any market, jumping from a 1-bathroom house to a 2-bathroom house, it's a significant jump because people value that second bathroom. If you have a family there, of 2, 3, 4 people, so somebody's in the bathroom, you want that second bathroom to be able to use it, right? That's what I mean when there's value in that second bathroom. Hey, also, if you want to use my exact house flipping calculator that I personally use to analyze every single deal before buying it, to know exactly how much it's going to cost me, what profit I should expect, and to know if this is going to be a deal or a pass. If you want to have the true confidence, clarity, and control over your numbers, I'll leave a link down below if you want to check it out. Property type number 5. Now, hear me out on this one. I love trees, but far away from any property foundation. I don't like any trees, shrubs, bushes, anything touching the foundation. And the reason for that is because those can cause many structural foundation problems, whether roots start cracking and breaking the foundation itself, or just overall structural movement and damage. And it can get very expensive just to even get rid of that tree. And I guess back in the day when people started planting trees in their front yards or just near the house, they didn't expect that in 10, 20, 30 years, those trees would grow to a very enormous size and end up breaking their foundation. And now us as investors come in and look at it and say, this property has some sloping, some unevenness, it's falling apart, it's breaking in half, which I have seen those properties literally broken in half because of foundation issue, or just it was cracked in general because of a tree in the front yard or backyard. And for me, that's gonna be a big pass. And the reason for that is just because the cost, the time, not only to remove the big tree, but also to fix now the foundation, back to the other point that I made of not buying properties that have foundation issues. Once again, I love trees, but far, far away from any property that I buy. Property type number 6 that I would never buy is just homes with terrible or weird layouts. I remember walking into this one property, the kitchen and dining room, and right across from it was the bathroom. And I just thought to myself, if somebody's using the bathroom, they come out after something in there, and people are eating, it's just a terrible layout design. I'm not sure why they structured it that way, but it would have been very hard to replace it somewhere else in the house, and that also can get very costly. When I look at a property, the overall layout of the house needs to flow very smoothly. From the point you walk into the house to the point you walk out to the backyard, the different sections of the home needs to be nicely placed around the house. You want the rooms all private to one side, maybe the living room and the dining room and the kitchen off to another side. The bathroom is located properly, whether it's next to a bedroom or in a bedroom. All those things matter. Why? Because once again, the end consumer is gonna notice. And there are some times when the property has a terrible layout to begin with, and you may be able to take down a wall, and that way it opens up the space. Those properties I can buy. But when the changes start becoming very challenging and difficult, meaning changing one bathroom to another location or the kitchen changing it to a completely different side, it can be done, but you also have to consider the time it's gonna take, extra, and also the additional costs you're gonna incur for having to replace plumbing, electrical, moving all of it around. Property type number 7 that I would not buy, houses with no driveway and or parking. Let's be honest, people have cars, people need a place to put their cars and park them. Whether that's on-street parking or driveway or garage, somewhere to place their car or cars that they might have. The same way people value a second bathroom, the same way people value having a place to put their cars. And something that people don't tend to notice, but it gives you a lot of information about a property, is that when you have a crowded street, just like a bunch of cars just parked everywhere, it tells you a lot about that specific block and neighborhood. If there's a ton of cars all the time, it's gonna be very hard to park. And that may be something that deters a potential buyer. At the end of the day, we want to sell this to somebody that actually wants to live here. Property type number 8, the general location, the neighborhood, and specifically, this is super important, the overall neighbors on each side, front, back, if it has any neighbors. And I can tell you so many stories that I've had personally when I've bought properties, both good neighbors and terrible neighbors, that just gave me complete stress and headaches during the transformation process. So when you're touring a property, you also have the opportunity to look at both neighbors on each side, even across the street. How do their front yards look? Do they have trash and cars just laying around in the front yard? Or are they well kept? These are all things that you have to think about, not just about the property itself that you're buying, but you have to look around and see the area. The same way a consumer, a buyer looks at when they're buying a property, they look at the neighbors. You also have to look through that lens because they will look at it the same way. The last thing you want is a crazy neighbor that will just scare off any potential buyer of your property. Number 9, this is a very interesting one, but I have to include it because I personally use this as kind of my general rule of thumb. I would not buy a property that I personally don't see myself living in or renting in. And you might say, but this property, you're just gonna flip it. You're just making money off of it. Why does it matter if you find yourself living in it or not? Well, I'll tell you, once again, you have to think about the end consumer. If you personally would not live in a specific house or location, what makes you think that someone else might come in and they might want to live there? And I know that not every investor thinks this way, but I put a lot of love and thought into these properties that I renovate. And I want the same thing for the end buyer to know that I've put a lot of thought and love into these properties, making sure that what they're getting is a great quality product that they actually love and want to live in, that they'll actually create lots of memories with their family or loved ones. Now you might say that's a lot of lovey-dovey stuff, but the truth is, this is a home. It's a real thing that people actually want to move into. People need a place to live. So why not make it an enjoyable experience for them? And in return, you'll actually end up making a lot more money because you've put a lot of thought behind it. And I can tell you that people will notice the quality of work that you do on your properties. The last one, I think the most important one on this list, which is why I left it for the end, is that I will not buy a property where I'm just forcing a deal just to make it happen. I think when I was starting off, I had this perspective that I just needed to get my hands on another deal. Just to say that I bought another deal to the public, to the social media, it sounded sexy, right? Hey, I just bought another house, and then next week, another house, another house. All of that sounds cool and sexy when you're telling people, right? You're showcasing what you do. But the truth is, if you're just forcing deals just to make them happen, but there's not really any profit behind them, then what's the point of flipping houses? We're in this business to make money, but also to give the end user a quality product. I would much rather do 2 or 3 deals in a year than do 20, 30, 50 deals in a year, but put all my thought and energy and time and attention to the detail on these properties. Because once again, people will notice. And ultimately, that's how you make the most amount of money possible. Because now you have people competing against the same house, your house. Flipping houses isn't really about doing more. It's about doing the right ones. Knowing what to say no to is just as important as what to say yes to. Now that I went over the 10 types of properties that I avoid, now let me give you my exact criteria for actually buying the right ones. Once again, this is just my buy box, my criteria that I use when making the decision. You don't have to use the same ones, but you can use it as a general framework to build your own buy box and criteria when you're buying your own properties. Because what I can say is that when you master the right type of property for you in your specific market, it makes it a lot easier when you know exactly what you're buying. You're not just jumping around from different types of properties and different markets in different complete areas. Master one type of property when you're just starting off, and then you'll see the growth over time. So my ideal buy box criteria is very simple. I look for 3-bedroom, 2 baths. Those are my ideal types of properties. Now, there are times when I do come across a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house where the numbers just make sense and it's not gonna take me too long. It's just a quick and easy flip, then I'll take it. But normally, because I know the general demographic and population that wants to move into these areas, I know that generally it's gonna be a family of 3, 4, 5 people. And so a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house is gonna fit that criteria for that specific consumer. And I also know that it's gonna be a larger buyer pool for that specific property when it comes time to sell it. Now I have people competing for that same property. The second thing, the location has to be solid. Like I said, the neighbors on each side, front, back, left, everywhere. In the overall neighborhood. I want people to come into this neighborhood, not only the house, but the neighborhood to say, wow, I wanna live in this neighborhood. It doesn't have to be $1 million neighborhood. There's also pocket neighborhoods in any area. Look for the great neighborhoods and look for the ugly homes in those places, and that's where you can create the most value in those neighborhoods. Next one, layout, design, potential. I know I've mentioned it before, but this one is huge. I wanna come into a house knowing that I can actually come in here and add value. If the home is already renovated, then there's really no point. I can't bring any value to it. But when you have a great layout or a property that just needs to get down a couple walls to open up the space, those are the kind of properties that I'm looking for. Next one, a very simple one, structurally sound. No foundation issues typically, and just the overall structure needs to be solid. That one's kind of self-explanatory. The next one is more of a physical feature about the property itself, and that's a raised foundation. Most homes that come in 2 ways. One, being on a slab, so meaning it's just on a piece of concrete. And the next one is a raised foundation, meaning you have a crawl space underneath and you can actually go underneath the house. And the reason for this one is I prefer those raised foundation ones because when it comes to plumbing and electrical and all that stuff, it's very easy to work with. When you have your guys coming in and doing the work, they can cut out, open a hole, and they can work underneath the house, or they can, go through the crawl space access. On the flip side, when you have concrete slabs, when the house is sitting on a slab, when you have to renovate and redo the plumbing or electrical and stuff like that, you actually have to rip open the concrete itself. Now you're physically altering the property. It still can be done, it's not challenging, but it does add sometimes a bit of cost and timeline to the overall project. So raised foundations is usually my ideal go-to property. Next one is more of a personal preference, but single-story homes. Once again, going back to that demographic in the area, I know that most people, when they buy a home in these areas, they tend to stay for a long time. And so as they get older, the single-story homes tend to hold a lot more value versus the 2-story homes when you have stairs. And as you get older, it gets harder to climb up those stairs. Even though visually it looks nice to have those beautiful staircases, the truth and reality is that as we get older, our knees don't work as well. So having that single-story home where somebody can age in and grow old with the home, those are the kind of properties that I tend to value and other people as well. And lastly, this is kind of my personal strategy that I use, but I really try to go after the first-time home buyer or the second-time home buyer. And the reason for that is because it's a bigger buyer pool. There's a bigger market for that. So when I have a property that's a perfect starter home, I know that the demand is there for that property and I won't have a hard time selling it. The most important piece about all of this is just remembering to keep the buyer in mind throughout the entire process. Because once again, this house you're renovating for them, not for yourself. Unless at the end of the day you plan to live in it, but in most cases, we want to pull out our money and make the most and maximize our profit. And to do that, we actually need to sell it to the end buyer. Remember, this is a business, and just like in a business, you have the product or the service. In this case, the product is the house itself, and then on the other side, you have the consumer, the end user. So in any business, you have to think about it that way. The end consumer, the end user, the customer, those are the people that want to buy this product that you have. And your goal is to find ways to attract that buyer to your product by creating the most value possible when you're renovating it. Remember that I say all of this just to showcase the information, things that have worked for me and what I now use as my own personal criteria. You don't necessarily have to use the exact same things that I use. Take bits and pieces of what works for you in your specific market. At the end of the day, my goal is just to provide you with the real information, the real stuff behind this business. Because I've said it before, it is truly an incredible business when you know what to look for and when you know what to do with it. And just remember, master one type of deal, get good at it, and then the rest will follow. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate you for watching. Peace.